Welcome everybody to the second week of lectures. Today we're joined by Kristy Balliet and Sarah Moylan. I'm going to quickly introduce them and then we can get started with their presentations. So Kristy Balliet is partner at BairBalliet, a design and research office based out of Chicago and Los Angeles, and a member of the design faculty at SCI-Arc. Kristy is also the co-chair of the Possible Mediums Project, which is a series of events showcasing design investigations based in speculative architecture mediums. BairBalliet's work has been exhibited internationally in the 2016 Venice Architecture Biennial and in various locations around the United States, including the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Architecture and Design Museum in Los Angeles, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit, and many more. In 2018, they were named a finalist for the 2018 Moma PS1 Young Architects Program. Prior to co-founding BairBalliet, Kristy was an associate professor at the Knowlton School of Architecture at Ohio State and was associate professor in Studio Greg Lynn at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. She has also taught at the University of Pennsylvania and Philadelphia University. She worked for 7 years as a project designer at Erdie McHenry Architecture in Philadelphia. Balliet also holds a bachelor's of architecture from Philadelphia University and a master's degree from UCLA. Welcome, Kristy. Thank you for coming. And then Sarah Moylan. Since 2019, Sarah Moylan has been the global head of business development at MVRDV, a Rotterdam, Netherlands-based architecture and urban design office. Sarah guides the business development team, contributing to the strategic development of MVRDVs globally and working with potential clients and collaborators to realize their projects with the office. Before working at MVRDV, Sarah worked at architecture and design offices in the US, UK, and Europe, including OMA. Sarah was also a manager of store development and real estate at Starbucks in Amsterdam for many years. Having worked in many regions and in a variety of roles within the built environment, Sarah has found that the seeming nuances and or vast differences of each locale demands a flexibility and openness to be able to gain insight into the places and people, which we will hopefully hear about today. She is now living in Rotterdam, but she has lived in many places, including Milwaukee, Washington, DC, London, Dublin, Los Angeles, New York, and Amsterdam. She received her master's degree in architecture from UCLA and has a bachelor's of fine arts from the Corcoran School of Art and Design at George Washington University in Washington, DC. She's also a licensed architect in the state of New York. Thank you both for coming.
Here, thank you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Okay, let me just switch over here. Thank you for that introduction, Naomi. That was wonderful. I will share my screen. How is that working?
Looks great.
Awesome. So I'd like to first I'm going to set my timer because I look forward to the Q&A at the end. I'd like to first thank Yulia and UCLA for the invitation. I look forward to the conversation at the end with all of you and of course with Sarah. I have long been an admirer of the work of Sarah's office, MVRDV. In fact, I was introduced to their office as a graduate student here at UCLA. My work study job was to assist in the gallery, and my very first task was hanging a very, very large MVRDV model that people could stick their head into. That was 15 years ago. Since then, I've spent, as Naomi went over nicely, so I won't have to go in detail. I've spent 5 years in Vienna, 5 years in Columbus, Ohio, and the last 5 years here in Los Angeles. And as was indicated by Naomi, prior to graduate school, I practiced for 7 years in Philadelphia following my Bachelor of Architecture. Today, I look forward to talking about the past 5 years specifically, what my office has done, when it was founded, how it has evolved, talk to you a little bit about our design issues, tactics, and maybe a few dreams for its future life. For those, I may definitely need to consult with Sarah for the business development side of things. So BairBalliet is Kristy Balliet, myself, based here in Los Angeles, and Kelly Bair, based in Chicago, also an alum of UCLA. Together, we have an office that no one can spell or pronounce, So first tip, think about that as you move forward. Though we met at UCLA as graduate students in 2003, I think I've already done the math for you. Our first gig together was a decade later for Possible Mediums in 2013, a curatorial project that originated in the Midwest. It attempted to shake up the context in which architecture was taught, practiced, and engaged. Possible Mediums was at its heart about gathering architects with differing views together in a variety of formats. So perhaps it's no surprise that Kelly and I, a true odd couple, would emerge from Possible Mediums as partners in a design firm in 2016. So back to the family tree. The office started when we were commissioned by the curators of the 2016 Venice Biennale, alongside 11 other US architecture firms, to exhibit that year in the United States Pavilion. That was the result of a long weekend charrette that Kelly and I had done to respond to a public call. And that charrette was after a long summer trip from Michigan to Ohio. I only mention that because I feel like I'm very fortunate to have this relationship with Kelly in this office, even though it started with a phone call. Hey, do you want to go on to this competition together? And so I think that remembering as you're evolving how you began is really important, and lectures like today allow you to do that, and I appreciate that. So in addition to Possible Mediums, Kelly and I both had previous practices. Central Standard Office of Design was Kelly's and Balliet Studios was mine. And it offered us a common yet distinctly separate playing field for us to begin building our practice. Kelly comes from a place that emphasizes profile on the left-hand side. She has a preference for flatness and sharp, witty clarity. However, that clarity gives way to unusual and typically through emergent three-dimensional formal traits that result from the abstraction of references. In her work, generic multiplicity yields specific oddities. But Kelly would say that I come from a place that emphasizes volume, that I believe volume is authored. This interest in volume attempts to move beyond the categorization of space as a passive thing to control, and instead asks volume to perform. I prefer excess and have a predilection for the difficult. I have an obsession for exposing the interior that results in a sensibility wrought with expansive qualities where telescopic envelades unfold and multiple subjectivities are engaged. I think envelades is going to end up in the chat, but let's see. So to start, this outline is a lineage of selected work constructing relationships between them. And the projects to date are diverse in their scope and medium, yet are united by their continual oscillation between two-dimensional profiles and three-dimensional volume. So like a family tree, we have issues, and today I will discuss a few. Together as BairBalliet, we work to merge our independent proclivities to produce something other, something that is neither purely profile nor volume, but somewhere in beyond as opposed to in between. In terms of growing, we think of it as filling out. Think of it more as the role of dimensionality. One reoccurrent issue in the work centers around the baggage that comes with merging two people and their respective offices. When an office fills out, literally in terms of increasing headcounts, but also figuratively in terms of multiplying research agendas, the continuous negotiation yields novelties that may not have emerged from any one office. So taking a quick look back, here's our first project where you can see these novelties result in the other that was mentioned earlier. The struggle is real as each project challenges these personal proclivities. Likely symptomatic of our first issue is also our belief in the iterative process. We work alone, but together, 1,000 miles apart. With an office in Chicago and Los Angeles, we have always worked remote. The work is mediated through computer screens, cell phone text, screenshots, and more emojis than any middle-aged women would care to admit. With every project, we look to establish the disciplinary context in which a project is developed, as well as challenge the conventions by which it's typically put into the world, meaning how are the artifacts produced and disseminated. It's a messy process at first, but with mess comes options, and we like to keep ours open until we land on something we define as sufficiently weird, something we both feel elicits our curiosities, but also doesn't sit quite right with either of us. The sufficiently weird signals sufficiently weird signals that we've moved beyond our respective comfort zones into new productive territories. And lastly, our issue that maybe I'll talk about the most today is our image problem. This refers to both how we construct an identity for ourselves that isn't tied to a particular design style or trend, yet still participates in the current dialogue, how we constantly reflect back on previous work once it's been archived, and more literally, how we grapple with a practice that until recently, was working on speculative projects and not built projects. So I'll take a sideways jump just for 1 second, because recently we have started to complete a few built projects. And the project that I have here on the screen is a project that aims to contain and negotiate 2 volumes that coexist side by side and are tactically linked by physical and visual connections. It's a 2,800 square foot tenant improvement with a 5-story corner within a 5-story corner building in Humboldt Park, Chicago. The clients, a husband and wife, were invested in developing a space that could be used by multiple generations within their neighborhood. The design has 3 parts: the cafe, the indoor play space, and the party room. Each part has a choreographed relationship to the other while addressing the distinct needs in terms of program, acoustical requirements, and the logistic of hosting, play, and work. Following that project last summer, we worked on another project that we've started to call the split screen projects. This was also in Chicago. Here, the program was twice the size, but it also was working on similar problems of how to spatially split up a space into half that was dedicated to working parents and the other half that would be for a children's play space. That project is through permit, but not under construction yet, as COVID has slowed things down a bit, particularly for this particular program type. So let's get back to the issues of representation and quite frankly, the work that mostly our office has been doing in the last 5 years. This next set of projects are a sample of a series of projects that interrogate the role of the line as a space to generate and design volume, not just represent it. So the first in this set is a project that we call the graphic line object, or endearingly nicknamed GLOW for short in the office. It was a project commissioned for an exhibition at Carnegie Mellon University, and the exhibition was entitled Designing the Computational Image, or Imagining Computational Design. So here, lines were generated using a drawing methodology that utilizes virtual reality as a fully immersive canvas, where lines move from 2 to 3 dimensions. Lines now have surfaces, mass, volume. In this drawing environment, line weight is a term that now bears physical and material qualities, and dimensionality moves beyond a Cartesian grid towards an in the round cloud of points. The project was ultimately comprised of a set of what we call drawn models: the shelf, the plaque, the wall, 3 things that typically find themselves on a wall in the way that a drawing or a flat image would, but have qualities of 3-dimensionality that we explored at the convergence of this virtual and physical worlds of the drawn line. That same year, we were honored to be selected as finalists for the Moma PS1 Young Architects program. Young is an ever expanding definition I've continued to learn. But this program was in its 19th year at the time, and each year architects compete to develop a proposal for the courtyard of the Moma PS1 branch in Queens. The courtyard and installation hosts and engages thousands of summer visitors as part of their annual DJ warm-up sessions. For our proposal that came on the heels of this other research that we were doing on the line, the attitude and sensibility developed into a project that we titled Loud Lines. Here in this case, Loud Lines invited visitors to inhabit a drawing. And the final set of projects I will share today falls under the categories of research that we've been calling cores. It has to do with developing a design methodology that begins with a close examination of the architectural interior, specifically moments of spatial interchange. Through analysis and abstraction of these moments, core samples are designed that evoke a partial or incomplete construction of a yet to be in the world spatial realm. A core sample for us offers a density of information in a small footprint and within a limited volume, a potent architectural concentrate. For us, cores oscillate between object and backdrop, interior and exterior, mass and volume. Sorry, I keep flipping around here. The story of cores in many ways starts in the middle. This was a project that we worked on in 2018 when we were obsessed with middles, particularly the absence of them. In our previous project, architects' distinct parts were equally examined. There, it was more about scalar ploys and misleading appearances through the use of plinths, or things that are at the bottom of a building, or partial walls, often things that are in the middle or the filling of a building, and parapets, often things that are associated with the top of a building. But for the project No Middle Mid-Rise, we revisited our fascination with this oscillation between top, middles, and bottoms by redacting or getting rid of the middle. We asked what happens if you enter a building from the top, and can enter directly into the building, could enter directly back down into the city, or begin to negotiate and move through a building from the top and to the ground, as opposed to how we're used to moving from the ground up into the building. And so another way that this core research has played itself out is in the form of a recent exhibition. No More Room was an exhibition that is both a physical construct in the gallery and a virtual content delivered via a website that merges the physical and virtual worlds. So for here, well, maybe just for a little context, this exhibition just closed a couple weeks ago. So this was an exhibition that we did at SCI-Arc, and we embraced the challenge of what it would be like to do an exhibition that you would want to share with many. And it had a physical element within the gallery, but a virtual element that we would be able to share with a much larger audience. And so for this, we decided to take this idea of a core sample, and actually place it into the gallery. So we see the core as having two definitions. First, an architectural definition, such as a stair or an elevator core or a structural core. Or, as we lean on it more, we see it as an essential area, a dense spatial territory of a building, a home, a room. And of course, core sample also leans heavily on another definition, and that is the geological definition, a concentrated extraction from the earth, such as a core sample. A core sample is a small but dense sample of multiple layers of information that represents a span of time. So in this project, we became very fascinated by designing something that was incomplete, that looked like it had been extracted from something, but was also could have its own qualities standing there alone, kind of erect in the gallery. At this moment in time, we started to think that it's valuable to shift our attention not towards a complete architecture, but rather a designed incomplete. This leaves room for a project, a single designed object, to fill a This leaves room for the gallery, for the project, a single designed object to fill the gallery with multiple forms of completion and anticipates multiple audiences. The decisions of how the core is designed is related in large part to how it flickers between the process of subtracting information and the addition of qualities. So you can sort of see here, when we zoom in on some of the images from the exhibition, that the blue screen objects that are in the background of the physical gallery, once we begin to move into the virtual realm and even into these detail images, you begin to see the relationship between what is usually understood as background, like a blue screen, something that's not meant to be there. And here they're sort of brought up into the foreground, or in direct dialogue with the physical object in the space. And this helps us to maybe move to the other part of the exhibition, which was the virtual part, which was the idea of taking the physical object that is in the gallery and activating all of the space around it, that the blue screen walls begin to participate and become the foreground, the middle ground, and the background in the way that most of you would experience it if you visited the exhibition through the website. So the website was designed to feature a split screen that you can see here, with the left screen revealing a live feed camera from the gallery, showing the physical space of the gallery. And the right side was a moving camera that reveals product produced content. So if you visit the website which is still active on SCI-Arc's website, you can sort of see the way that these two things live side by side. But for the purposes here, I would just say that the exhibition is conceived of episodically, meaning that the content changes throughout the course of the show. We ultimately produced 3 episodes that dropped bi-weekly on the website. They each explored the ways in which we encounter rooms, from the cropping and constructed nature of a Zoom meeting to one's physical movement between thresholds and an envelade. I'm sort of missing one image, which is kind of a bummer. And so let me see. Awesome. To conclude, I just wanted to say that the core issues we've presented today are no doubt an expansion of our office ethos, a pursuit towards an architecture that is both and. It's flat and full, it's interior and exterior, it's one and many, and one that possesses the capacity for space to project multiple subjectivities. So in many ways, I see everything that I've shown today as a collective project. However, this last hint of what we're working on right now is the House of Cores, and it shakes itself out, it lands on the ground, and it begins to imagine occupation in the role of a humble house. The House of Cores is situated in a semi-urban neighborhood surrounded by traditional Southern California bungalows. The house encourages multiple scenarios for domestic living, working, renting, owning, present, future, and challenges the long-standing notion of mine and yours by fostering core migration both within a single lot as well as across it, as you can begin to see here in the front elevation and the kind of rear elevation, where at times the cores would maybe spin themselves off and land in other people's backyards. We've yet to work out the legal issues on this, but the idea that the house, as opposed to being 4 rooms constructed within one of these bungalows, that they would pull themselves out, they would each on their own be somewhat complete and incomplete at the same time, either being able to group together around what's shown here as a ring, to be able to kind of pull the house together in that way, or scatter itself throughout a neighborhood. And this is a project that we are currently working on and looking forward to showing you all in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristy.
Shall I kick in then, I guess? Okay. Kristy, it's really great to see your work, I have to say. It's really fresh and it's exciting for me to kind of, and some of what you were talking about as well really resonates with me in terms of the interior perspective and some of the explorations and so forth. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Are you seeing the actual presentation?
Yep, you're good.
Yep. Okay, cool. So yeah, 20 minutes to kind of, I took a moment, a little different than Kristy's approach, because my trajectory in life has been kind of circuitous. So I chose to talk about this idea of palimpsest in terms of how my profession, how my work, how my personal life, I guess also to some extent has kind of built up to where I am today. And I think for me, it's also, coming as I came to architecture as an artist and have now found myself in a business development role. So it's a very kind of fascinating. So interesting to go back through it. I've lived through in many different places around the world. Born in Milwaukee, studied in LA and DC, worked in New York, and then a lot of time spent back and forth in Ireland and now in Rotterdam. But what has always been of interest for me, I guess, and kind of an inspiration has been about composition is a strong part of my direction and my interest in architecture and design and art. I was heavily influenced by photography. So looking at kind of some of the greats, Alfred Stieglitz, Paul Strand, where their work was in direct relationship with the built environment and with our role within that, and thinking about how the space and time is presented in photography was a huge draw for me. And that's what then led me into studying and pursuing a degree in fine art. And initially I focused on being a photographer. So that was my draw. And as I got into my studies, I realized that there was so much more to think about in terms of space and experience. So that beyond the frame and the boundary of the photograph, I started to see more about experience and time. So this work by Anne Hamilton was really disruptive for me. It started to talk about smell, sound, light, and I saw art transforming in larger spaces and experiences. And this piece by Jessica Stockholder was another piece of the DIA I visited once when I was up in New York while studying in Washington, DC. And I was just floored by how in the space it became two-dimensional all of a sudden with this total exploration of color and texture. And yet you could experience it in many different ways. So this kind of work then I took and was inspired by and was finding ways to explore it in my own work. So I took memory. These are a couple pieces from my thesis project at Corcoran, where domestic experience, domestic space, family, migration, connections. And then I was looking for ways in which to explore these ideas. And I moved from photography to printmaking to 3 dimensions to installation pieces. So as an artist and thinking about what do you do now and where does your work go, as I was exploring these thoughts and then what do I do next, what I knew was that working collectively was really important to me. After I graduated from Corcoran, I moved back to Ireland and I started working. I've always been working or I worked for many, many years, I guess, in food service industry, so bartending, waitressing, etc. And when I was back in Ireland, I joined an artist studio, but then of course, you need to make some money. So I was back working in restaurants. And I had the opportunity to work at this restaurant, Eden, which was designed by a young architect by the name of Tom DePuer. It was an incredible space, and it really drew me in from a textural, compositional, experiential capacity, but also it was a great restaurant, amazing food, incredible wine, and the idea of all of this culminating made a lot of sense to me. But when talking to the architect and talking about his experience in making the space, what I missed was the perspective of the person working there, because as somebody working there, it was a difficult space to work. There were a lot of stairs moving in and out of the space. I had to go from one side of the restaurant to carry ice up to the bar. And I thought, I can think about this differently. What would studying architecture then mean for me? So after taking another year, 2 years out, I finally decided to apply and pursue an architecture master's at UCLA, which was an incredible experience. So I started at UCLA in 99, graduated in 2001. And so it became this culmination of investigating domestic space, society, collectivity. But I knew that UCLA was going to have a more conceptual approach. So I still could pull from a lot of the influences from different artists that I had. So Rachel Whiteread was one of them, thinking about occupiable or thinking beyond the occupiable building. And what was it then to take the artists and kind of installation experiences that I had that were drawing me to think about making architecture and translate that into plans, sections, elevations, scale models, and so forth. When I was first in Los Angeles, Richard Serra had an installation at the Geffen Contemporary, the Tilted Arcs, and it just blew my mind thinking, well, wait, can we live in this kind of environment? How again, does the domestic experience become influenced or could be influenced by the art that I'm experiencing? So bringing this all together. So on this little discovery path for this talk, I went back and looked at my some work from UCLA. And so I pulled up a study that was done in one of the studios that I did, where we were taking the flight, traffic, pedestrian patterns in and around a site at LAX. And so now I have to think about what it is to make digital architecture, and then how is that going to inform an actual built space. And that was what I experienced also in studying at UCLA and thinking about being an architect, thinking about making space. So taking all this influences and translating it into a spatial, livable, built environment. And then finished UCLA in 2001, and the summer previously had my first job in an architecture office or in a design office, and it was very different move from a conceptual thinking that I was exploring and had the benefit to explore at UCLA, and my kind of thinking through from being an artist into working for an interior designer. She was a sole practitioner on her own and doing a lot of mid-century modern renovations, a lot of furniture, programmed designing of the space, rethinking of the space, renovating the spaces, which was an incredible flip, but also made a lot of sense to me, because this is what we're living. This is how we're experiencing. This is the daily. And so from design into also being exposed to what it takes to run a business, and to be a young woman running her own firm and making ends meet and having an employee. So by both being the dream of the design, but also the practicality of the business, I had my eyes wide open to what it was going to take to continue to be part of this world and to continue my profession in this way. But still, I was, incredibly intrigued by and driven by the design, by thinking about light, by thinking about texture. I was able to then work with another small firm out of Malibu, actually, who did a lot of work on landscape and some institutional work, residential work. But again, finding these moments of detail. So the client in this case, we did an extension to an existing house, and the client in this case had an incredible nest collection. And we designed a wall in which the nest could be installed. And again, it was those moments that to me were both expressive, but also very personal, both to myself and to the client. From there, then from LA, after being in LA for about 6 years or so, including studying, I moved out to New York, and I got to work with a woman by the name of Clodagh. She has a firm that does hospitality design, a lot of hospitality design, residential. And we got to work on W Hotel in Fort Lauderdale, where we conceived of a stair that penetrated through the swimming pool. And you can see some skylights from the top that go through the pool into the reception areas. At this stage in my career, I started to become more of a project architect. So I was working alongside the design architect. And I think this was a real pinnacle moment for me also to realize that my hand didn't need to be on the pen. It didn't need to be the one to design, but what was it to be part of the team that facilitated the design? What did it take to make the design? And so with that, I worked with Clodagh for a couple of years, got to work on a few projects, moved on to another firm, Russell Groves, again, more work on interiors, and kept moving up into a more senior role. So in this case, I was had the opportunity to start being the studio manager, as well as running projects. But started to work with larger teams and facilitate the design with our consultants, engineers, lighting designers, alongside with having a relationship with the clients. And I hope that also through these images of the designs that I've been and the projects I've been involved with, there's some through line of a kind of attention to detail, of layering, but also of this kind of interest in the personal, the daily space. It also became more and more important to me to actually call myself an architect. After so many years of studying, having spent so many hours, I wanted to be able to say that I was an architect. So I started the process of actually registering my hours towards a certification that would allow me to take the exams. That also meant that I needed to think about who I was working with to get the right kinds of experiences to build my career up. So with Studio A, I was working more construction projects. This was a full floor fit out of about, now I'm lost between square feet and square meters, so apologies, I've been in Europe for a little while, but it was a full floor fit out in Fifth Avenue for a real estate firm, investment firm, sorry. And so from the beginning of concept through to the completion of the construction, I was the project architect on it. And saw the entire process, was on site working with contractors. Again, all of these sides of the process of the practice that were important for me because I wanted to have that total experience. What I was missing was a ground up construction project. And so it was 2007 that I believe that we started on this project for Pratt. And I was able to go through a whole process of the permitting and working with the users. And it was quite a large team, of course, contractors. So I was pretty proud to say that I had this under my belt. The project wasn't quite complete when I left New York, but I left New York in 2009. And it was a terrible time to be leaving architecture in general, a terrible time to be in architecture. The economic crisis was hitting. And I landed in Ireland without a job. And so took on a position, and this is an interesting side route as well, with all my experience in project management and able to think around creative execution, shall we say. I took a job with an NGO, a non-government organization that was Forum on Migration and Communications that was working in Ireland, where positive and promoting positive immigration reform. And we produced communications, content, and so forth, design pieces, art pieces to some extent, around stories to kind of improve education, improve awareness of what many people were going through. So with FOMAX, I worked with them for many years, or for a couple of years, and then also was able to do some work with research with the School of Architecture at the University of Limerick, and we did a project for Shannon Airport. And so what then I found was that I was getting a different perspective of practicing architecture and what it was to be an architect. And I think that's one of the things that I really find quite amazing about our profession, is that there's so many ways that you can be a part of the team and be part of the process and realize architecture. So from Ireland, I then moved to Amsterdam, which is about 10 years ago now, and got a role as a senior architect with EMEA, where I was focusing on the G-Star headquarters in Amsterdam. And it was unlike any other office I worked in. It was more like being back in school, where we did multiple iterations of single ideas. So you can see subtle differences of exploration of how the lighting was going to work in this space. It was great fun, and this is the end result. But it was also wasn't quite answering my questions for being a designer, being an architect, being a profession, this being my profession. And so I went on to work with Starbucks. And I started with Starbucks as a design manager, and had an incredible opportunity to work on designs of Starbucks stores throughout Europe and the Middle East. So this is a small little store that we worked on, that I designed for in Paris at Galeries Lafayette. Some details of it, and it was quite unique projects that we were able to do. I also had a lot of work in Turkey, in Istanbul, and was able to go there. And it was through these experiences and being around the world that I also met an incredible amount of people and had so many conversations on what it was to think about, be part of design and architecture. And from the design team, I moved on then to the store development and real estate team, where I became a manager as part of leading the store development and store portfolio management. For me, it was kind of a natural transition, because I had been in my management roles, I've been overseeing the execution of design a lot. And now I was on a more strategic side. And after that, I then, and this is a store in Prague, then I got back to architecture. And that was quite amazing for me. Christy talks about not being able to pronounce the name of her firm. MVRDV is a tongue twister for many. I sometimes get stumbled up on it, but I first came across MVRDV when I was studying architecture at UCLA. And this building, the BPRO building, was a huge moment of, for me, I thought this was just incredible. Thinking about how the interior space worked, thinking about surface, thinking about perspective. And so then to be able to come back in the role that I'm in now, which as the global head of business development, I oversee and work with our team to think about our strategy on looking for new work, on talking with clients, on thinking about how we're going to do our best. So just a couple more projects to share with you, some recent things that are going on at the moment. We have this incredible installation in London at the end of Oxford Street at Marble Arch, called Marble Arch Hill. And amazingly, this is a photograph from this morning. It's in construction, almost completion. And we hope to open it in a couple of weeks. Truly, yeah, I hope to be able to get there as well. Another project that we're working on right now in Detroit, glass mural. So it's a small little mixed-use building, but it's what we're really excited about is the technology to be printing kind of local artists' artwork on the facades, on the glass, to really activate the neighborhood, the area. And finally, a project that's in construction that should be completing by the end of this year, Valley in Amsterdam, which every time I drive by it, it blows my mind. I think some of the things that we're doing with regard to the detailing, what has been able to be happening with regard to technology and so forth is quite incredible. So I'm very proud to be part of MVRDV at this stage now. And yeah, who knows where I'll be, where things will go, but that's a little bit of my story. Yeah, thanks.
Great, thank you both so much. So many questions. Maybe I'll just start off. Sarah, your history is like crazy and very compelling, and I'm sure you've learned a lot throughout all your experiences. I guess I'm kind of curious because like MVRDV, oh my God, see, MVRDV, okay, is I would think probably like, I at least think of it as like the largest like academic office in a way. Like somehow, like when you go to school, everybody references MVRDV, like they still are able to keep their kind of like ingenuity and like research, even though they have been very successful. And I guess like from the business perspective, this is kind of what Kristy, I guess, was also saying. She was wondering, like, how do you think that they've been successful in that? And like, what are your conversations in the office pertaining to that? Like, I guess.
Yeah, it is an incredible, I mean, one of the things that I think we're so, you know, Rotterdam's a great city to be headquartered in, let's put it that way, because we have a lot of resources at our hand, and frankly, our costs are fairly competitive. So to have an office of our size, we're up to 300 people now, but we have satellite offices in Paris, Berlin, and Shanghai. But we're very, and you know, we're not about making, of course, making money, making profit is important. We've got to pay our teams well and so forth. And that's something that I believe strongly in. And it's one of the reasons why I went into the business that I'm in now, is because architects tend not to be able to be very versed in the topic of what it is, what our fees should be, how we should get our money, etc. So I fight hard for that, and I feel strongly about it. But we don't compromise on our work at all. And I think it's our integrity as well that holds us in high regard. And we know also the matching the ambitions of our clients to ourselves. There's certain places that it just doesn't make sense for us to work. Certain people it doesn't make sense for us to work with. So that's a really important part of how I think our success comes to be.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have a question from a student from Jumpstart, Cam. They were wondering if you could talk a bit about the difference between, this is for Sarah, the difference between working as a project architect and working as a designer, and I guess which one you preferred in your experience with both. I mean, it's Kristy, if you also
yeah. I mean, for me, it made like being a project architect for me, and I'd say the best example was when I was on a team with a design architect and myself. So we were working very closely, and she was mainly responsible for the design. I was mainly responsible for the administration, the execution, making sure we were on time, on budget, delivering what we needed to deliver. That didn't stop us from having really important conversations about the progression of the design and how the design was reacting to the client's needs, and making sure, you know, I was communicating with her about the brief. So in my practice, it made sense and it felt right for me to become more on the management, administrative, overseeing, facilitating. And I have so deep appreciation and respect for the people who are just full into the design and can see that. And I think that's what our balance can be as an architecture community, is that there's so many different skills that we all have, and we're at our best when we're supporting each other and complementing each other. So
yeah, okay, yeah, Kristy.
Oh, I would just say, yeah, we definitely gave, I think your presentation was amazing. I respect that you were able to kind of consolidate that all into 20 minutes. You might get a sense of just from the little bit of my presentation, but I would not have been able to do that. So I definitely focused on the last 5 years. But what's interesting is in the first 7 years of my career, when I knew very little, was the closest to being a project architect that I was, meaning I worked in a very small office in out of undergraduate, and it was 2 partners, and I was their first employee. And so when I left them 7 years later, they were an office of 13. And so in those 7 years, I was, the person who made sure that there was paper in the printer, was, doing all of the work that the partners weren't doing in the office, and also having to go to meetings if they were not able to, and so it was interesting so I have such respect for that project architect role. And in some ways, I think the project architect is the one that sort of does it all. I look back now as someone who, over the last 5 years has been trying to develop a small practice of my own. And I wish I would have paid more attention in those, been more conscious in those first 7 years out of undergrad, because I think that the project architect aspect of being an architect is like 75%, if not more, of what you do every day, whether you're in a small office where now I have to do it all again, or whether you're working for someone else and you have that title sort of more specifically assigned. I just think I would encourage all of you to just embrace the kind of project architect aspect of architecture, because it will serve you regardless of what type of practice or where you find yourself in a practice as you move along.
Great, thanks. Okay, so another question from Jasmine from Jumpstart is for Sarah also. You mentioned that there are a lot of different ways one can participate in architecture. For students, how do you, what would you recommend or advice you would give about where to start? It's kind of going off the last
I think
question.
it's so hard. I mean, when I had my first job, I think I may have even found it on Craigslist, which I don't even know if it exists anymore. At that time, UCLA wasn't so great with kind of putting us together with jobs. So I was looking high and low for something that paid because I needed to make some money through the summer. For me, it didn't work to just take an internship. So I think I'd say at the end of the day, I would say you try something and there's always going to be another time to try something else, because it's a long career and you get the more exposure you can have. So whether it's an interiors firm, whether it's a landscape firm, even looking at different engineers or consultants, lighting consultants, contractors. I think, I've known people who have come through contracting and building. And when you actually build and you know what it is to build something, it's quite an incredible experience, because then you're going to think about how you design differently. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that question. I think it's really, it's kind of what's in front of you, or what you might have a glimpse of something that is a bit of an interest, but don't be afraid to try it and don't be afraid to change.
Yeah, I would also just say, from my experience, just go for it. Whatever it is, just go for it. So another question, I guess I'm going to kind of change this one a bit, but for both of you, I guess, how do you think that the places you have lived have transformed your ideas about architecture? It's a very large question, but you've both lived in lots of very specific places, I guess. And do you think that those places have made a difference about how you think about the built environment?
Yeah, I would, first of all, it's so awesome to hear of all the places that Sarah has lived, because sometimes I get self-conscious of how many places that I've sort of moved throughout my career. But I think that maybe not all, but I think as architects, we are obviously very curious about the built environment. And so I think in some ways more open to experiencing life by experiencing ourselves in different built environments. I wouldn't have said it that way, 20 years ago, but it makes sense to me that I've been kind of attracted or at least interested in taking leaps to different cities in order to expand the career, to have different ways of looking at things. So I would say absolutely. I think particularly maybe the most obvious one, and we both have it, is just the moving from the United States into a more European culture, where it definitely increased my interest in how outdoor and public space is used in Europe. It's very different than in the United States, and certainly where I grew up, which was like in rural United States. I would also say increasingly I'm realizing like just how we climate control, like how we control the climates within our buildings. I sometimes get very angered in the United States that we can't open our windows, for example. And it's so small things like that, I think, have definitely sort of impacted how I've expanded what I think architecture can do, and how some really small changes, like whether windows are operable or not, have a huge impact, not on just what the building looks like, but also like how it operates and how interior spaces are connected to exterior spaces.
Yeah, I think to add to that, one of my more recently, I think now working with MVRDV again, is that public participation and kind of engagement and social approaches to architecture and to design. It's a very, and how architecture is not just conceived, but practiced. It's so different than the US. And it's just, it kind of blows my mind sometimes in a way, but I'm really thankful to have that kind of different sides of the experience. 100%, every place I've been, there's something I've taken from that one or that one or that one. And I have an extreme curiosity. It's, Los Angeles to New York, from Milwaukee, from Ireland. Like I wanted to know about all that. So, and it continues, so.
Okay, well, it's exactly 2 o'clock. So thank you both so much for coming and speaking to us. Julia, if you have any closing thoughts.
I just want to thank personally Sarah and Christy for making it today. Thank you for your time, for this really inspiring 2 lectures, and sharing all your experiences with our students. And I'm also thankful for the students for their attendance and their kind of questions and curiosity, what they brought to the Q&A today. And I'm excited to look forward what's next in your careers, Sarah and Christy, and hope to meet you, Sarah, in person one day, and you, Christy, soon again in person as well. And so, yes. Thanks both of you for joining us today. Bringing you back to UCLA AUD was my pleasure, and I hope we stay in touch and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all. Good to meet you, Christy. Hopefully we'll also meet in person, all of you.
That would be amazing.
All the best. Yeah, it would be. All the best. Thanks very much.
Bye, students. Bye.
Bye. Bye.